Welcome to The Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on The Alignment Show. And a good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the world. Welcome to a recut edition of The Alignment Show. What you're about to see is an episode that we actually broadcast last week. But what was going on then was a little different than our usual. I was in a hospital room with my daughter, who was in the critical care unit at the time. So the sound wasn't the best. I'm going to leave the intro just like it is, with the bad sound and me looking like I'm one step away from being a corpse. It is what it is. But the thing that really affected it that makes me want to do an updated version is that the signal was not the best from the room. I could see that there were times during the broadcast that the video got interrupted. And so what I've done is to piece together the intro as it was broadcast, the original recording of the interview so that it will be high quality. I'll come back then with the outro as it was actually broadcast, and then I will have just a little bit extra to tell you about next week's guest. In any case, I hope that it is worth your while to be here with us on the Alignment Show, and I'm looking forward to you benefiting from the insights of Jo Penn. Work out this time. We didn't know that this would be the case when I set up this episode. So we might get interrupted in our broadcast. And it seems like the hospital's network is really strong, but I don't control it. And so if our feed gets interrupted, we will reschedule this episode since our guests' insights are too important to miss. So let me introduce you a little bit to our guest this week. It's her second appearance here on the Alignment Show. Jo Penn has been a mentor from afar to me for a long time, as she is for hundreds of thousands of writers. Also a podcast inspiration. She's a pioneer in so many areas, but beyond being a pioneer, really she continues to explore the leading edge in her professional areas. So she is now a leader in the budding direct sales movement among authors, as well as a leader among AI-assisted artisan authors. And we'll talk more about what that even means. In any case, I have learned so much about the writing craft from her, as well as the craft of podcasting. I've especially learned something about the business of being a writer. I've been a writer pretty much my whole life, started over 50 years ago. But so much of it was spent as a newspaper writer, a magazine writer, traditional publishing. Learning the business of writing is something that modern day authors, even if you're traditionally published, have to learn. Now, we recorded this episode in December in preparation for the release of her newest nonfiction book. It's the second edition of her seminal work, How to Write Nonfiction. Now, that is now out in her own store, her online store, will be available in all the major retailers by the end of this month. So the timing is essential, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to go ahead with this episode. In our show notes, we will link to her previous episode here on the Alignment Show, as well as the resources that we talk about in this episode. So just a quick background for people who don't already know her. Joanna Penn writes nonfiction for authors and is an award-winning New York Times and USA Today best-selling thriller, dark fantasy, crime, and memoir author. She writes those as J.F. Penn. She's an award-winning podcaster and a creative entrepreneur. So whether you're a writer, a solopreneur, an employee, or someone thinking about what's important to you, you will find this interview with Jo useful and encouraging in your own journey of living your values to value your life. And so with that setup, once again, I'm going to kind of apologize for our setting here. looks a little different, that's not a problem. I don't know if it looks this way to you guys. I'm getting a little bit of a pulsing in the lighting, you know, industrial lighting in a hospital room and all that sort of thing. Hope the sound is okay, but the recording will be a little more familiar, and we'll come back after the episode with some observations. So without any further delay, we're just so happy to have with us today Jo Penn. So very glad to have Jo with us today. Hi, Jo. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show, Don.
Thank you for being here. I know it's a late Friday afternoon where you are. Don't know what the weather's like here in East Tennessee. It's cold and overcast. Maybe
Yes,
that way in England
pretty
all the time.
similar. Pretty similar here.
Oh my, well, I appreciate the time here. We're going to jump right into talking about the latest book. And off the top of my head, how many books do you have out at this point? You've got both fiction and nonfiction. Have you lost count?
Well, it's funny. I'm turning 50 next year, so I have been making a list. And so I'm almost, my goal was 50 by 50, and I'm kind of almost there. Absolutely. But yeah, so this is off my nonfiction. I've got around sort of 15-ish nonfiction.
And see, I love it that you have to say 15-ish. I don't know if that's because you've lost count or because does this count as a book or is this more of a pamphlet? You know, these
Mm.
are full-fledged books we're talking about here, right?
So How to Write Nonfiction, the second edition, which is the one that's just coming out. It is a full rewrite of the first edition, which was in 2018. So, and doing a subsequent edition is obviously a lot of work. It's almost just as much work as a first edition, really, because I did rewrite the whole thing, and a lot has changed for me and also in the world, I guess, since 2018. So I feel like the subsequent editions are just as much a big book as anything else.
Mm-hmm. So when we're saying 15-ish, for example, that's not counting um, how to write nonfiction twice or anything.
No.
This is a second. Okay, and that's one of the things I wanted to establish for our listeners there. So the latest book, How to Write Nonfiction, second edition. When did the first one come out? I've got it, but I'm
2018.
time blind. So 2018. Okay,
Mm.
and a lot has changed since then. One of the questions I was going to ask is, how did you decide to do an update, even though, as you say, it's a complete rewrite? You know,
Mm.
what makes it a second edition as opposed to just a new book? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. Well, I mean, because it's called How to Write Nonfiction, I wasn't going to do another book, a completely separate book on the same topic. And when it comes to my craft books, so I've got How to Write a Novel, How to Write Nonfiction, and Writing the Shadow. So I've got these three core craft books, and and those are the books that actually sell the most for me in nonfiction. So one of the reasons was this is one of my top selling books, and when I actually looked at it, I was like, oh, there's quite a lot in there that I want to change. So this is a big reason, if people are listening, when you move on, when your writing craft improves, when also since 2018, I've written my memoir, Pilgrimage, and I wanted to include writing memoir in this edition. So that was quite a big change because I didn't really include memoir before. So I've included separate chapters on that. Also, I wanted to narrate the audiobook. So you will also know this as a voice brand. Your voice is distinctive, and my voice is distinctive. And the previous edition was narrated by another person, another British woman, but not me. And since then, I've got a little studio here in my office, and I narrate my own audiobooks. In fact, I've been doing that today. So that was another reason that I wanted to redo it, was because I wanted to do that myself. And also within the book, I have sort of tips on publishing, but also marketing. And a lot's changed also since 2018. And some of the companies I recommended have disappeared, or resources have changed, as well as my craft getting better. So if people are considering a subsequent edition, I think how you've changed, but also the business side is important. I do have other books that are really old, but I'm not updating those because they don't sell as well as this one. So those are some of the reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I was going to ask is how did you settle on this one as opposed to some of the other craft books? But I could also see that some of the other craft books, they haven't changed that much. Maybe I mean, the process of writing has probably not changed that much. Um,
Well, also, how to write a novel. My most recent book was Writing the Shadow, which was last year, and then previous to that, writing a novel was only a couple of years before that. Oh, you've got Writing the Shadow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not showing up well in the light here, but I love this cover here. So I'm intrigued to hear. Oh, and by the way, folks, when she sends you a book, there's business cards and stuff in there too. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Um, when I talk with folks about writing, I'm usually working more with beginners, and
Mhm.
I talk about five hats. The writing. See if I can remember them here: writing, editing, the publishing, the business aspect. I'm forgetting the fifth one right now, but these are very different skill sets. Now,
Mm.
a lot of our listeners might be thinking he's talking about sucking editions, and I'm still trying to get that first one written.
Yeah.
You've been in this game for a while. You started in 2006, I think, was your first
Yes, well
published book.
done. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, among those five hats, whatever the fifth one is, um,
Maybe it's mindset. What do you think? Mindset?
now, now this is going to bug me now. Let's see, writing, editing, publishing, business.
Marketing?
I'm marketing, that's it, yes. And it's ironic that that's the one that I forgot because as we frequently hear you say on your show, which by the way, folks, if you're not familiar with Jo Penn, I mentioned in the introduction, she has one of the, I would call it premier podcasts among writers. So you've been in it from that aspect for a long time.
Mm.
Um, and I've got two questions trying to get out at the same time. I'm going to see if I can lead them together. One of the things I admire about you as a writer is that you didn't let that thing about I'm not an expert already stop you from writing.
Mm.
In fact, I would say you used writing as a tool to learn whatever it is you wanted to learn. So
Yes.
as you've written the craft books for writers, it has made you a better writer, better business person, whatever.
Mm.
If you were starting now, what would you advise yourself about the first thing to do beyond the writing among those five hats? I mean, if you're not writing, you don't have anything to sell or whatever, but it's
Mm.
a very different
Well,
skill set. So, what's the next skill set?
Well, I think the main thing I've done, I guess, is as you say, I've shared what I've learned. So, for example, How to Market a Book is in its third edition, and the first edition actually came out like it must have been 2010 or something like that. Because as I learned about marketing, I wrote on my blog and I did podcast episodes, and then I put that together into a book. So I've always only been sort of one or two steps ahead of normal people who are just starting out, and that's kind of what I've done each time is okay, oh, I've learned something, or my audience has then asked me things. So doing a podcast or doing that kind of thing, when people ask questions, I'm like, okay, I clearly need to write a book on that in order to help people. But part of this comes to the marketing aspect, and if you are just starting out, the one of the biggest issues I think we all have is when we're writing, we are very much focused on ourselves. It's like we're looking internally, and that's super important. You've got to do that. But if you want to either sell your book to a traditional publisher, or if you want to self publish and you actually want to reach readers, or if you want to make any money with your books, then you do have to think about the person on the other end. So it's like you and I having a conversation and we're responding to each other. When we are publishing a book, when we're marketing a book, we actually have to think, what does that other person want? So even down to a book title. So the reason my books are called quite basic things like How to Write Nonfiction and How to Write a Novel, How to Market a Book, these things are there because of SEO, search engine optimization. People are looking for books with those titles. And so if I have a book that addresses that, then and I give it that title, instead of using a clever title, that means that people will be able to find it. So if you're just starting out, yes, you have to focus on you, but you also have to think about the reader. And that isn't just for people starting out, that's for everyone,
Right.
whether you write fiction or nonfiction. I mean, it's even true with a podcast like this or videos or whatever. You have to think about who's watching, who's listening, how can we give them, you, value for the time that they're going to spend either on the book or the video, whatever. So that, keeping that in mind, you and the other person all the time, is actually very difficult. And I would say it's one of the biggest challenges of being a writer, but is also one of the most important things.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering from a procedural standpoint, you are, to me, famous as a discovery writer, and that applies to both the fiction and the nonfiction. Do you think about that reader as you're writing the very first draft, or is that something that you shape more later?
Mm. I think for me, I'm often always my reader anyway, so it's kind of easier to think about. But I think in terms of the nonfiction, a lot of it is answering questions that people have asked or that people are wondering about, that I have also wondered about. And then with fiction, it's kind of telling a story that you're interested in, but also within a genre. I think this understanding genre, and I know you've struggled with this, understanding, where you fit in an ecosystem is super important. So I do tend to have that in mind, but also because I write multiple books in a series for a specific target audience, and my podcast is for that audience, for the nonfiction for Joanna Penn, then that works really well. But in order to, also to just to share with people, my fiction does not work that well because I write, as JF Penn, I write quite a diverse group of things: travel memoir, horror, crime, action adventure, all these different things. And those audiences are quite different. So even though I'm like pretty good at nonfiction targeting, I am not so good at fiction. But hey, we have to do things that make us happy as well as things that bring us an income. And I guess this is another tip: the longer you do this, the more you can play around with different books. It doesn't really matter if one book fails miserably, and often you don't even know what book it's going to be. So I keep trying, and sometimes things pop back in or things fall off, or you never really know when things are going to take off, I guess.
Mm. In fact, I wonder, as you talk about in the age of AI, that you double
Mm,
down on being human, if that feeds into the idea of the author being the brand. I mean, quite honestly, I will read anything that you write, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You talk in the nonfiction book about voice, which we don't
mm.
think about quite so much with nonfiction. But it's, I want to see Jo Penn's take on whatever it is. So is that feeding more of that sort of thing? Is that the way the market is going? That people are more and
Mm.
more looking for the person?
I don't know if that's where the market is going, because I think at the end of the day, a person looking for the answer to a problem is going to get the answer to that problem however they want. And with nonfiction, that's often what happens. And I kind of think of it as in two different things. There's the book itself does the marketing. So if you're looking for how to write nonfiction, you might stumble upon my book and you might not care who I am at all. Or I have this one book called Career Change, and that's not related at all really to anything or any of my other books. And so, but people searching for that find it, and then that's the only one they read. And then there's the other way around, which is as you're talking about there, the author. So for you, it's Don on the Alignment Show, and you've got the various books that you've got, and you've got your your Substack and all of that. And so people then come to you because you're you, and then they might buy something. So I almost feel like it's two separate angles into what you're doing. And the whole idea of double down on being human is actually reaching people almost individually. So hopefully people can tell that neither you or I are AI avatars at the moment. Now, and that's not because the technology is not already there. The technology is already there, that this could be two AI avatars, but hopefully people know this is your channel, so they would know you well enough that if you were going to do that, you would say. And I've said to my audience, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to be like, "Hi, I'm AI Jo, but this today is real Jo."
Mhm.
And we're not saying we'll never do it, because we may well do it, but we're going to be honest and talk about it and the implications of that with the audience. So I think that part of the doubling down on being human is being honest and being open, like you're open and honest about, being a carer for your daughter Hannah,
Mhm.
and you say, look, something might happen, I might just have to go, because that's what my values are. My values are caring for my child, and so that's really important, and so people know that about you, and you share that. And so I think that brings your humanity to everything you do, and then people are like, oh well, that's really interesting. Don's book is
Mhm.
also about a speaker who is caring for a daughter. I wonder if that has any, real life parallels going on there. And so people therefore might be interested in your book. So I think the message to people listening is bring as much as you can into of your humanity into your books, but also in your book marketing. And I know you're just being authentic in sharing that. It's not like you're using your situation to kind of make people feel a certain way. You're just doing that because that's you. And I think that's the most important thing.
And I do know, and you know as well, people who feel like, well, I don't want to put too much of myself in there because that would be egotistical or whatever. And so,
Mm,
yeah, there is that difference between I'm going to mine what's happened in my life to make money out of it, you know. And of course, the
mm,
whole thing. I mean, you have a lot of episodes about uh, the relationship with money. It
mm,
doesn't come in quite as much with the nonfiction book, How to Write Nonfiction,
mm,
second edition, because that's the reason a lot of people write nonfiction. We can be open about it. We're trying to lead people to courses or whatever. Um,
mm,
so I'm wondering, we've talked about AI a couple of times here. Um, you have, to me, famously anticipated AI for a long time. Little side trip here. People ask me all the time, "Am I worried about AI?" And I know you're not worried. You are how's it you put it? An AI assisted
assisted.
artisan author, the four A's.
Mm,
It's a tool to use.
mm,
But I was on a panel discussion with a Chamber of Commerce group, and they asked about this, and I wasn't trying to be salacious, but I said, I am not, as a writer, I am not going to have AI write the book for me. That would be like paying somebody to have sex on my behalf. I mean, that's the fun part. So I'm going to do the writing, but I will use AI to assist me in that. Now, that's a
mm,
long way to set up the question in which you've anticipated AI for a long time. As it's developing, how are you using AI differently than what you thought you would? How has it surprised you in helping you to be Jo Penn or Joanna Penn or JF Penn? And for folks listening, Jo writes fiction under JF Penn as well as memoir and other things.
mm.
Joanna Penn is the author name she uses in writing her craft books for writers. So just to give that context.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of using AI, I just want to come back on your example there, because this is also an interesting thing because of your caring situation and for your daughter. One of the reasons that some people are using AI to write is because they have deficits or challenges in certain areas. So, for example, if you can only speak, maybe like 10 sentences, and then you can say to the AI, expand that into 1,000 words. That is something that is enabling people who have various challenges. So, what I think is really important is encouraging people to use AI tools to help them in whatever way they feel they need. And I'm very keen on people embracing the use of tools, rather than sort of challenging other people's usage. So personally, I don't mind what people are using it for. I have my own lines. So the How to Write Nonfiction book, there is no writing by AI except for the examples of the prompts in some places I say, this is a good prompt you could use to find comparison titles for your book. Or if you want to find an agent, or if you want to find your target market, here's some prompts you can use. So that's my line. But you just showed Writing the Shadow, and the cover for that, the cover, that typewriter that you're showing there, the kind of golden typewriter and the smoke, I made that on Midjourney. So
Oh,
midjourney.com is an image AI. And also I've got another book just behind me here, Blood Vintage, and I made the book trailer with Midjourney, and then I made it move with Runway ML, which is this fantastic AI tool for making images into video. And for some people, their fun is making video. My fun is kind of turning these images into video using these tools, because that's not my skill. So I think the point is that what's surprising is that I knew I was a visual person, because I do write very visually. I do see things in my mind and I type what I see with fiction. But I actually really love turning that into images for my book covers. So for the last 2 years, all my book covers are AI images that I've made that I then give to my designer, except the How to Write Nonfiction, because that was a second edition. So we just used the same cover
right.
with a new font color. It's blue instead of red. So I think that was surprising to me. I think there's new tools that are coming out all the time. So I don't know if you've played with Google Notebook LM. Have you played with that?
I have. And in fact, you were anticipating a question. I could not remember which one it was. One of the things Google Notebook LM will do is to produce a what sounds like a podcast episode with two people having a conversation. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think I've heard you say the usefulness of that in a way is not so much that it's going to give me a recording that I can then put out on the web as if it
Mm.
is real. It's interesting to hear the conversation generated by these AI agents, so to speak, because it gives me insight into what readers might be thinking as they interact with my book. Is that how you're
Mhm.
using it?
Well, I haven't been using so much the audio side, but what you can do is load up all your research, and you can get it to help you with structuring. You can get it to help you with, I uploaded just a whole load of brain dump stuff and said, what are the interesting story ideas in this? So for people listening, that's Google Notebook LM. But as we talk just now, today, I don't know when this goes out, but Friday, the 13th of December, 2024, Notebook LM announced some new changes to that tool, where you can interact with the audio host. So you
Wow.
can have, yeah, I know, you can have the AI hosts going, and then you can say, I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt you and ask you this question. So actually, that to me, I haven't tried it yet. I went logged on just before we got on the phone, because I was like, oh, I really want to try it, because that might be very cool. And if I can talk to an AI, human me, talk to an AI that is able to have a conversation about my work, that is very interesting. So I think the main thing with all these AI tools is I want people to remember what it was like in the year 2000. If people can remember the year 2000, we can generally remember where we were in the millennium, right?
Mhm.
Because it was a big year. And we didn't have smartphones. We had those little Nokia things. I had a pager back then.
Yeah.
We did have email, but it was still even in the early, really, days of email. The internet was new. Amazon was still that clunky old website. And so what things were like in the year 2000 for the internet is where we are now, really, or year one for AI. And so when people are like, oh, I wonder, what would I ever use that for? And I'm like, yeah, when I saw the iPhone in 2007, I said to my husband, I would never use that. I don't need a phone like that. I'm really happy with my Nokia.
Yeah.
And I mean, surely we can all remember those examples when we were like, oh, why would I ever use that? Why would I ever need streaming music? I've got my CDs or my vinyl or whatever. So I think what we have to be a little bit humble about with AI is we don't really know what we're going to find very cool, or what we might use, or how, for example, we might use AI to help us Right.
Mhm.
So I don't want you to write that off as a possibility. Even, for example, AI transcription, which is one of the biggest
Mhm.
use cases now. If you're like you say, if you're sitting with Hannah and I don't know, maybe she's asleep or something, and you do some dictation, and then you can upload that to an AI tool and it transcribes it for you. That's still AI assisted writing. So
Mhm.
there's so many things that we might be able to do in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I will sometimes say AI makes a good intern, but you don't want to put it in charge. I don't know if that's a
Oh
good way
yeah,
to
for
put
sure.
it.
We're in charge.
Yeah, yeah.
For now.
And, although it did occur to me, as we're talking about the notebook LM, am I saying it right? LLM, notebook LLM.
LM. It's just notebook LM.
LM, okay. And by the way, for folks listening, especially if you're on here audio only, we're pointing to the show notes, and you can go to confidencecultivators.com to find the episode show notes. We'll have links to all of these things we're talking about here. Um, but it did occur to me as you were talking about Notebook LM that since you could interact with the host, you don't have to wait for somebody like me to interview you. I mean, you could make your own podcast and have them interview you, and then this is part of your marketing. Now, of course, this is not going
Yes.
to replace going on other people's podcasts, but it could be an additional tool.
It could be. And also, one of the things that now is a really good idea for book marketing is little snippets of video that you put on YouTube Shorts or people who do TikTok or on Instagram or wherever, right? You do like little snippets. I find these very hard to do. So I could take a snippet from this interview because we have some chemistry over the line where I'm responding to your questions. So even I'm really interested to think if I can do this with an AI tool around, say, each of my books. And in reality, and you're wonderful, you do read my books, but most people who do interviews are not reading every single book that they are talking about. Whereas the Notebook LM AI host has read the book in like a second,
Yes.
and they are able to ask questions. So if I can say, hey, Notebook, ask me 20 questions on this book, and then if I respond and there's some kind of and then I'm able to turn that into snippets for marketing, that actually might be a really effective way and a much faster way than us. And this is wonderful that we can do this, but obviously there's a lot of time involved, your time and my time and all of these things. So I just think what we have to think about the tools is this amplification and enhancement and using them in ways that help us achieve our creative goals, and then also ethically as well. Obviously you and I want to be ethical in our use,
Mm.
and also and it may be with those snippets I might not even share the voice of the host, I might just share me responding,
Mm.
but my response will be much more alive because it feels like a conversation. Whereas normally when I do video, when there's no one else here, I'm like, I sound a bit like a robot myself.
You can hear the difference. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and that's a really good insight right there. If it makes it feel like a conversation, you know that
Mm,
it's AI, and yet it feels like you're talking with somebody else. And I've been amazed when I've uploaded a couple of my books, and they get some insightful
mm.
observations. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, that is true. So.
Yes, I'm very clever. I meant that. Yes.
Oh, well, and speaking of clever in another sort of way, I'll give a quick context here. I have a friend who wrote a Newbery Award winner some years back. He spent a lifetime as a newspaper reporter and then editor and publisher. He was really good with the nonfiction stuff.
Mm,
He has commented to me that it was really different writing the fiction book, and then he's recently completed, maybe taking it to a traditional publisher, maybe doing independent publishing. He has completed a book on Stoicism, which is nonfiction, but
mm,
it's not reportage. And he's commented how different the writing is in each of these three areas.
mm,
So, this is context to say you're one of those rare authors who are accomplished in writing fiction and nonfiction. So,
mm.
how does your fiction writing affect your nonfiction writing? How does the nonfiction writing affect the fiction writing? Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, well, I think I've become a better writer of both of them by trying to bring over skills. So I think my nonfiction in recent years, and again, Writing the Shadow, my most personal book, really, in terms of the how-to stuff. It's about the delving into the darkness and
Mhm.
bringing that into our words. And I don't think I could have written that without some of the other stuff I've written. So the pilgrimage memoir, some of my darker fiction books. So it's real, and the strongest nonfiction has that deeper personal point of view in.
Mhm.
And that point of view is, again, for you, what it feels like to be up all night caring for your daughter, that's like a your person point of view. And you can bring that into nonfiction, for example, writing about grit and discipline and doing the work, even if you're exhausted and all that. Your experience is just as valuable as someone who's, I don't know, in the military and running all night or whatever it is.
Mhm.
There's these different human lessons that you can bring into your nonfiction, and I've tried to do that a lot more in my more recent nonfiction. So in How to Write Nonfiction, I go into a lot more of that. But that is the essence of fiction. You have to be in somebody else's mind as they care for somebody, or as they risk their life, or as they do these various things that they do in fiction. And you're making it up, but essentially it's empathy with the character whose perspective you're in the hope that the person reading it feels empathy and therefore is affected by what's happening. And the same with nonfiction. You're really just trying to communicate what you feel, what happened to you, the lessons you've learned, in the hope of helping someone else through that. But of course, you've written these, you call them the parables, which are
Business parables, yes. Mhm.
business parables, which are essentially fictional stories based on nonfiction, teaching a nonfiction thing. So you've made it even more complicated, but so why did you decide to do it that way?
Yeah, it's not complicated enough, which it makes it hard for marketing because there is not a business parable bisect category. Um,
Although I did look up your comps. So obviously the most famous one is Who Moved My Cheese? That is the most famous comp. And that is just in self-help success.
mhm.
So literally those books are in self-help. I looked up some other ones for you. The Wealthy Gardener. I don't know if you've seen that, but these are in success self-help, personal transformation, and motivational self-help. So they're essentially catalogued as nonfiction,
Mhm.
even though they are essentially a story. But you could have just put them into fiction, like motivational fiction, I guess.
Yeah, I guess there is a category for motivational fiction. I'll
Mm.
have to look into that. One of the
Yeah.
things, and of course, as independent publishers, we're dealing more directly with readers. When you're dealing with a traditional publisher, your market is actually bookstores, book buyers, and
Mm.
bookstores. But one of the things that happens with business parables is your books, Joe, in a series in particular, they're going to be shelved together. Whereas the business parables, one of my mentors is Bob Berg, who was one of the co-authors of The Go Giver. And
Mm.
The Go Giver will show up just in standard business. The Go Giver
Mm.
Marriage, on the other hand, is in a completely different part of the bookstore. And so, even though it's a series, now your writer books, the writer craft books, would probably be shelved altogether, but
Mm.
most of your marketing is not really through bookstores. Folks who are on here with us visually will see it. I want to say out loud for the audio folks, creativepennbooks.com. And as I love hearing Joe say, that's pen with a double N. So creativepen, PENN books.com, that leads to your direct store through which all of your craft books are available. And this is a trend among publishing. That it's not just we're going to do it with just Amazon or Amazon and Kobo and Apple and whoever. Uh, you don't even have to depend, if you don't want to. You don't even have to depend on the retailers. So
Mm.
how has that changed for both fiction and nonfiction?
Yeah. So there are a few reasons to do it. The first of all is you can get really nice quality books. So you can see some of my foiled editions behind me there. So obviously when we publish through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of that kind of print on demand, we have quite basic options. So all of my books are on all the usual stores. If you can order the paperback through Amazon, and it's fine. It's a nice paperback, but it's no different to anyone else's paperback. Whereas I can do these foiled editions, I can do beautiful hardbacks, I can do end papers, I can have ribbons, I can do all kinds of cool things. So the How to Write Nonfiction second edition, I have a ribbon in the hardback because I just love a ribbon. I think it's just a wonderful thing. So just for a couple of extra dollars, it can just be much nicer product. So it's this thinking about what do people want in terms of a nice product. Now, as a nonfiction reader, I mostly listen to audiobooks and buy the hardback. That's what I do with nonfiction. With fiction, I read on my Kindle. So I read ebooks. I never read fiction in print at all. So, you know, we all have different behavior. It doesn't matter what yours is, but I'm now narrating the audiobook, which again, people can buy direct or on any of the usual stores. And then these beautiful books. Also, I can do bundles. So because I can make a bit more money when I sell direct, even though it's about the same price as the other stores, I can sell like a bundle of 6 books, for example, and that which will cover the business stuff and the marketing as well. And I can still make more money than if you buy them from, say, Amazon. I also have products that are not available on Amazon. So the workbook, for example, I've got a bundle with the workbook that's not available on the other stores. So you can offer these different things that are better for customers, but also are better for the author. And what we're finding is people are really happy to potentially pay a couple of dollars more to know that they're supporting the author directly. And I'm also doing early access. So this book is available from the 1st of January 2025 on my store, and then the 31st of January 2025 everywhere else. So this is the reality of the business of being an author, is you have to think about how you're going to make some money as well. And when people buy direct, I get the money straight away. Whereas if people buy on Amazon, it's 60 days after the month end that they buy it. So again, you can see if you have to pay your mortgage with your book sales, these are the types of things you have to do. Now, I know that's not everybody, but it is a consideration. If you're listening and you want to make money with books, then these are the different things that we can think about in order to make a living with our writing.
And this brings up for me, you brought a business background to your writing. I mean, you were in business, several different ones, a charter, a boat business, which I can't imagine the unpredictability of the
Yeah, it was
weather.
very bad.
Oh man, so you brought that experience in as a writer. Were you thinking about the business aspects? I know you must have been. So this is a leading question. You know, a lot of folks who are starting on writing, they don't even think about the business aspect until after they've written. So how did your first books were nonfiction? You didn't start writing fiction until a little bit later. How did the business considerations, I don't want to say concerns, but considerations, shape the choices of the writing as you began?
Yeah, so I was an IT consultant for 13 years. That was my main thing. But as you said, I did have some other little businesses. Briefly ran a charter boat business, scuba diving in New Zealand, and also did property investment. And those 3 things together actually did shape my business, because and pretty much all of those failed or were miserable. And when I wanted to leave my job and make money in another way. So most people don't start writing for financial reasons, but even though I didn't start for financial reasons, I was very determined to make it pay. And so at the same time as writing nonfiction, I also upskilled as a professional speaker. And I know you know about professional speaking. So I thought I could be a speaker and I could sell books at the back of the room. That was the first business plan, essentially. then I learned about online business, blogging, podcasting, and I started my podcast and I thought, oh, I can sell online courses. And that's what I started in next. So I had these different multiple streams of income from the beginning and started to include things like affiliate income within my books. So it says at the very beginning of How to Write Nonfiction and all my books, there are affiliate links within this book. And if you buy from that, I will get a percentage of the sale. And so I've always been open about that. And that is a nice source of income. So I've kind of designed this ecosystem of business around the books. As you mentioned, there's a series, so you can make more money per book. But going way back, it was always that I wanted to leave my job, but it did take 5 years before I was able to leave my job because I was working sort of part-time. And then, of course, I had to ramp up my income because most authors don't make that much money. So if you are listening and you're someone who does want to make money with your books, then you do have to learn some of these other skills around marketing, for example, or around pitching to traditional publishing, or thinking about things like speaking or other stuff. So I definitely had it in mind from the beginning. But I wouldn't continue doing it unless I also loved it. There are much easier ways to make a living. But sorry, just to come back on the scuba diving, the charter boat thing, because that was really instructive, that and the property investment. I discovered that I did not want to be physically tied to a business. So
Mhm.
obviously the charter boat, the price of fuel, the weather, the people, I mean, the whole thing was just a nightmare. It only happened for like a month because it was so bad. And then the property investment, we were doing properties up, painting and doing kitchens and stuff. And I was like, this is really not me. I am not enthusiastic about kitchens. I learned that the business I wanted to have was based on a laptop, that I wanted to work online, that I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed being on my own. I didn't want to be in a noisy environment. I didn't want to do customer service. I didn't want to be dependent on the weather. I mean, so learning what you don't want is actually really good for deciding what you do want. So being a writer is not an easy way to make a living, but it's a darn sight easier than running a charter boat business.
Well, and if it's what you love to do, I mean, you learned this by doing those other businesses. I would assume
Mm,
before you
mm.
went into the charter boat business that there was something attractive about it to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have
Mainly,
done it.
mainly my skipper of a husband.
Okay, okay. So it sounded like a good idea. Turned out not to be. The only way you
Yeah.
could find that out was by doing it. And so,
Mm,
for people listening, you may think um, there's a famous, well, I don't know how famous it is. It's famous among writers. There was a survey done back in about 2006 where they asked people, have you ever thought about writing a book? And 85% of people said they thought they had a book in them. Only
yeah.
15% started, only 6% got halfway through, only 3% published. And keep in mind, this is before a lot of the independent publishing that we have now.
Mm,
And only, let's see, only 3% finished and only 0.6% actually published. So that there's a lot of places in there, especially if we think about those 5 hats, that you
mm.
can get stopped at any of them. And you're only going to do it if you love it.
Yeah.
So,
And I do think this comes back to the AI thing because I see people going, "Oh, well, you can just generate a book with AI." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, you can, but that's not a business."
mm, yeah, yeah.
You can generate a book a minute if you like, but that is not the job of being an author. And a lot more about this is what you learn along the way and who the person you become in writing the book and the people that
Mm,
you touch as you write the book. But as you said there, nobody's going to get the benefit from your book unless it's out there in the world. And so the effort of editing, the effort of publishing, the effort of marketing, the effort of connecting with people, all of these things go far beyond the book. So the work of being a writer, the job of being an author, the actual writing, it's just a small part of
mhm.
the whole. And I almost feel that's what people are forgetting
Oh yeah.
with the whole AI stuff. It's like they've forgotten that, if you just generate stuff and publish it, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Lois Kramer, who works with professional speakers on their marketing all the time. Lois,
Mm.
I can't remember who she quotes. She gives credit to somebody else, but the quote is, "As a professional speaker, the job is not speaking; the job is getting the gig."
Mm.
And so this comes into play with it. Although going back to the writing itself, and just a quick question here: do you get a different itch that you're scratching creatively when you write nonfiction versus fiction, or is it kind of the
Oh,
same
yeah.
spectrum?
No, no, it's definitely different, and that I think that's why I do both. It's like, right now I would really, really like to write some fiction, but I am forcing myself to narrate the audiobook, which is actually very tiring. As you know, it's a bit like the public speaking. You have to do a sort of you have to be there in
Hmm.
a big way. You can't just phone it in. You have to give your energy.
It's a lot of
Um,
energy, yeah.
yeah, to the audiobook in the same way. So I think it is very different. And but I would just remind people, or tell people, I did not think I could write fiction. I thought I was not creative. In the very beginning, I didn't even consider that I would write fiction. And then what happened is, over time, as I relaxed into writing in different ways, doing courses, reading a lot of books, trying things out, getting rid of the mental blocks. Then I started writing fiction, and then finally writing memoir, which I think is even more difficult. So I
Mm.
think whatever you feel, maybe it's poetry, maybe it's screenplays, maybe it's actual plays, all these things, music, there's so many forms of creativity. And I think tapping into that sense of, this is what I want to create, I think
Mm.
that's so important in what we do. So I would really encourage people, whatever that urge is, then follow that. But that urge only takes you so far, and then you do have to add a bit of grit and determination in order to get it over the finish line.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and that reminds me of another question. Is the first one I had put in what I sent to you. You had said at one point that you were not going to write any more of the craft books. That what needed to be said had been said. You were going to focus on J.F. Penn.
Mm,
That would be fiction, but would also be memoir and travel and all that sort of thing. And then I could hear you talking about it in your podcast. It's almost like, but I've got to write this.
yeah.
Was it that different creative urge? And we'll combine it with another question. Is this now leading to some other craft books?
Well, like I said, I guess at the top, I felt I needed a new edition. I don't feel like it's a new book because it is a second edition. So technically, I'm still in my lane, as in what I said. But I do feel like there will be more nonfiction books, but I almost wonder whether they will be coming under JF Penn. So you've heard me talk about my Gothic cathedral project.
Mhm.
I've been researching Gothic cathedrals for many years, and I have this real weird attraction to Gothic cathedrals. I wanted to be an architect in another life, and 1,000 years ago, I would have been a Gothic cathedral architect. But so there may be something around that, but I don't know what it is. And a bit like writing The Shadow took me more than a decade, more than 2 decades, really, to know what that was. I feel like this next nonfiction book is hard to know what the hell it is. It might be a midlife thing because I'm turning 50, but maybe this is something for you as well. Like, maybe you've written your parables because you weren't ready to write your true nonfiction or
Mhm.
your true fiction about the situation that you're in, or whatever else is going on. But I mean, do you feel like you will be branching out of those parables?
It's an interesting consideration. You will hear the advice constantly about pick a lane and stick with it. And yet, just about every author that I know, you, Rachel Herron, Mark Lishley Lefebvre, you're writing in all different things. It's like you're first pursuing your own interest and then
Mm,
finding the folks out there who need what you have produced. Now, I'm sure
mm.
that makes it harder from a business standpoint, but it probably makes it more satisfying. I know it does for me. So, yeah, absolutely. I have some fiction stories in me, and I've written some nonfiction books earlier. Some of them I'm re-editing. I'll start on some new stuff. But that creative itch, I mean, that's almost got to be at the base of it.
Mm.
And I'll mention one of your episodes as we're recording this. Your latest episode was with Michael Bungay Stanier, if I'm saying his name correctly. I had a couple of his books already. He's a great example of the business, not conglomerate, that's the wrong word, but where the multiple streams of
The
income and all that.
ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. And as I listened to him on your episode, it almost sounded like this was not something that he had planned, like he knew when he started out. It's almost like he woke up one day and he's successful. So there's a mix available there. And Joe, I know we've gone longer than what I said we were going to talk. There's just so much here I love digging into. I want to make sure that we have the connection there for folks who want to follow up on all this stuff we're talking about. If you're on here visually, I've got a QR code on the screen that will take you to Creative Penn Books. And if you're just hearing it, you can always just go to Creative Penn, that's Penn with a double N, creativepennbooks.com and find that. And then, where did my little caption things go? There we are. The show notes are on the screen, confidencecultivators.com. And if you're more old fashioned like me, just want to type it into a URL. There it is, creativepennbooks.com. So,
or
go
wherever
ahead.
you buy books, I think wherever you buy books, you should be able to get my books.
Oh, yeah. Let's emphasize that. It's not just these places. So there's almost always, Joe, something that the person I'm talking with wishes that I had mentioned that I didn't think to do so. Is there anything that you feel like we've left out, especially about this new edition of How to Write Nonfiction, that we need to say before we get off from here?
Well, I think we've covered lots, and it's always lovely to hear your questions and your thoughts on these things. I would say if people are on the video or are on the audio, I have a podcast, the Creative Penn Podcast, PENN, and as you said, I'm there every Monday with things. And I think you did just mention, you Michael waking up one day and being successful. I think part of this being a writer and longevity in this career is just keeping going. When I look back at some of the people I started with in sort of 2006 to 2008-ish, a lot of them have disappeared. But I feel like part of having a long-term career is waking up and getting back to it and doing another book. And even though, like you said, I've got nearly 50 books, that is over 16, 17 more years. So it's just consistency, I think, over time. So yes, for people just starting out, it is just one day at a time.
Yeah You can get overwhelmed looking at the entire forest.
Yeah.
There's somebody I was talking with yesterday, and she was saying there's just so much here, I'm overwhelmed. And it's a cliche, but it works. How do you eat an elephant? One bite
at a time.
Yeah. And so that led to, yes, but how do you decide where to take the next bite? And so you've illustrated that in our conversation here, and a lot of that is in the book, because you got to decide what's the next bite.
Yeah, true.
Very good. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being on here with us. I just love having a conversation with you. And this is not primarily a writer's show, but there's a lot of insight here for anybody in business, and especially for folks who are thinking about, am I part of that 85% or am I going to be at least the 15%?
Well,
So,
thanks so much for having me, Don. That was great.
Excellent. And we will, as I told Joe, I always struggle with how do I turn it over to my virtual self. But I guess it's time for me to go back to Don as the outro. Don?
Wasn't that great? I just enjoyed that conversation so much. It was always great to talk with. And as we emphasized a couple of times during that, it was a longer episode than we typically will broadcast. By the way, part of my setup here, there's a little more shaking of the camera because I don't have my mouse. I'm having to use the touchpad. So much of what we talked about there was really about adaptability and business in general, honoring your values. There's just so much there. If you're a writer, then absolutely, obviously, but there's so much there for everybody who is looking at what's important to me, what matters to me, how do I live my values, because life is too short. You want to spend it doing something that you don't want to do. And one of the things that occurs to me as Joe and I talked about creativity, and the way I would put it is that there is a need to scratch your own itches as you do whatever it is that you do to earn a living. We could talk about in terms of creative plumbing, for example. And in no way do I mean to put down plumbers as if somehow the manual labor is lesser than what we do. I'm thinking right now of somebody that I went to college with who didn't do traditional college very well. Struggled to pass, ultimately dropped out of college. Found out later in life that he was a master carpenter. He could do amazing things with creating space. And that was how he scratched his creative itch. So I think you do need to find something that satisfies whatever your itches might be. We talked with Joe about there being different itches with the nonfiction and the fiction. And I think arguably, even within nonfiction, there's a strong category known as memoir. It's different from writing a how-to book, for example. Lots of different itches there, lots of different ways to scratch it. And then ultimately harnessing that satisfaction by determination, by grit. That's where those 5 hats come in. Ironically enough, as we were playing the recording back, I had to deal with my daughter over there 3 different times. And so you find a way to work within your own reality. That too comes out of the conversation that we had with Joe. So once again, a little reminder, confidencecultivators.com. You'll find all the show notes. I hope I got most of the links. We'll even link to things like Midjourney, and we'll give a link to the specific episode with Michael Bungay Stanier on Joe's podcast, so that you can see what was going on with that. But whatever you might get from this episode, I hope that you will find that it helps you to live your values so that you can value your life. Who's coming up next week on the Alignment Show? I'm trying to remember for sure, and I'm a little hesitant to say because I'm not certain, but we will put that in the show notes. I want to encourage you to subscribe to confidencecultivators.com, because that's where you'll get the show notes. That's also where you'll get a heads up about who the next guest is. And because we've had to change the way that we do the show, it'll also give you some idea of when that next episode is likely to go up there. Thanks to Ms. Hannah over there in the hospital bed. We are no longer trying to broadcast at the same time, same day, every week. It just depends on when we can get it out there. So far, we've been doing it weekly, but I'm aiming for a minimum of twice a month. And so the advice that you get when you do this kind of thing is be consistent. Well, my consistency is in being consistently inconsistent. But our aim is to make sure that whenever we put out material, that it's not just filling in time, that it's something that will be useful to you in living your own life. And so watch this space, as they say, and we will be with you next week, or at the most the week after.
So there we have it. That is this week's edition of the Alignment Show. Well, actually last week's. But what I wanted to tell you a little bit about coming up next week, I think we have lined up Dennis LaRue. Dennis is somebody that I know through the Go Giver Success Alliance, Bob Berg's group. And Dennis has really impressed me in a lot of ways in recent months as I've gotten to know him. I wanted to bring him on to talk with you about what he learned about leadership. Now, that's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, but Dennis has some unique insights and some very practical insights. We'll also learn about his story as to how he came to do this sort of thing at this point in his life. So we will see you next week on the Alignment Show. That's it for this week's episode of the Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.